David Dunlop once referred to this building, the Cable Building, as at the corner of permanence and change, and it's very apt. This conference room is permanence. The conference room on the corner is called change. So you're in the permanence conference room. It is the Cable Building because this is a transportation building. Ted may remember the cable cars that ran along Broadway many years ago, except that they were a big failure. The big wheels for the cable cars were where the Angelica Theater is now. And if you could go beyond the walls of the Angelica, which I've done, you will see the outlines of where those cables used to turn, the big wheels. But it was a failure because the cable cars went at a constant speed, and when they turned around Union Square Park, some of them would tip over. So it didn't last very long. So I think it's appropriate to unveil the Balanced Transportation Analyzer in the Cable Building, the transportation building. Kheel-Komanoff is simply one of the most brilliant economists, transportation analysts, scientists, urban scientists that I have met. He's rejuvenated transportation alternatives. That is clearly a big force today. I'm just absolutely astounded with the power what was a very small group, and it's growing, has today in terms of the influence, certainly on this transportation commissioner, and has allowed many exciting things to happen in the city. We all know the defeat of congestion pricing. I've been working on tolls since I started working with Brian Ketchum on the Clean Air Act, and we thought we had tolls in it until 1977, I think, when the Holtzman-Moynihan Amendment came in. But I continue to work on that, and I continue to write op-eds. And so for me, this is very exciting to have what is the best tool that I have seen in my nearly 40 years of working on this. And it's getting better every time, I'm told by Charles. So without further ado, let's hear from Charles.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. It's a real pleasure to be in Sam's office, in Sam's building, and to be introduced by Sam, who is a unique person in the transportation field and in this city. He is unquestionably the only person who can traverse every community and every constituency and every level of discourse on transportation. He is a transportation planner and engineer, so he knows structures and how things are built. He is a traffic thinker. He coined the term gridlock 30 years ago, and he understands the way streets work, the way human beings operate in traffic and in transportation systems. And maybe most uniquely of all, he has a true common touch. And he's the one person in this field who can talk to and listen to Vinnie from Brooklyn, if you will, and be heard and be respectful and respected. He's really one of a kind. So thanks, Sam, for opening your office to us today. I have a few more introductions. The members of the team that have put this together. It's been a project of many people, but especially Dina Patel, if you'd raise your hands, a PhD physicist, and Will Fisher, a Princeton University computer sciences major, a senior in a couple of weeks, and Dina's been working with me for over a year, and Will very intensively every day for the past 2 months. So we have a joint effort. And then above all is Ted Kheel, who is in two ways the sponsor of this work. He is the sponsor in terms of providing resources that make this work possible. And he is also the fount of the ideas underlying this model, which are really two kinds of ideas. One is that if you charge a congestion toll, then you can not only reduce traffic that way, but you can support public transportation. And Ted became the first visible and prominent advocate of that idea back in the 1960s. And second, it's Ted's conceptual idea of joining the analysis of traffic and transit. And typically those fields are analyzed separately, and it's Ted's idea that we have embodied here to analyze them simultaneously and explore their interactivities. And that's why Ted coined this tool. The name is his, the Balanced Transportation Analyzer, or BTA. Now what we're going to do this morning is, first I'm going to go through this slide presentation, which is about 36 slides. Then we're going to open up the spreadsheet and look at a few pieces of it so you can see how it operates and what are some of the facilities it has and some of the results that it can produce. But this is primarily a talk about this tool, the Balanced Transportation Analyzer, and not so much about the specific policy proposals that Ted and I and others have been advancing that this tool supports. We are going to touch on them, if only to be able to show how the BTA works, and maybe we'll get into some details on the discussion. But for now, we're going to focus on the tool itself. So as you can see, the BTA is a spreadsheet model. It's geared to New York City. In theory, we could adapt it to other cities, but right now it is configured for New York. And it produces the outputs that are most important to transportation planners and public officials and the citizenry. Agency revenues, the speeds at which vehicles will operate, the time savings that vehicles will get or drivers will get as a result of tolling, VMT, that's vehicle miles traveled, and how many people will ride transit, and then emissions and other so-called externalities. These are some of the inputs. There are actually many others, but the key, we need baseline motor vehicle data, the amount of vehicles that are driving into the cordon, the time of day that they drive, and the day of the week, the speeds of these vehicles. And we also need, and we've inputted baseline subway and bus usage, ridership and revenue, the time of day and day of the week, and then equally important, what we call price elasticities. These are the responsiveness of drivers and transit users to the cost and efficiency of transit and driving. The origins of this report, as I noted, are in Ted Keel's vision of free transit. Here's a shot of the cover of the book that we produced a year and a half ago. That was with an early version of this model. And we now have what we call the Enhanced Balanced Transportation Analyzer 1.1, which features these advances. We can model time of day pricing. We can explicitly treat the relationship between speeds and volumes of vehicles. We have modeled weekends separately from weekdays, so rather than just applying arbitrary ratios, we have a whole separate model for that. We have some sensitivity analyses, which we'll go into, and it's easier to use. Why are we doing this? Just very quickly, the bedrock principle is that traffic pricing is essential to improving vehicle travel. I once wrote somewhere that you could have helicopters, in theory, that would remove all offending double parked vehicles from the streets, within 5 seconds, and within days or weeks, traffic would readjust to fill the gap, to fill the vacuum, until you charge a market clearing price, and the price that you charge is dependent on how clear you want to make the streets and, more importantly, the political viability of it. Until you do that, you're not going to make a real permanent dent in gridlock. But equally important is that traffic pricing provides a revenue source for transit. But then varying the tolls by price gives you 3 things. You can maximize the time savings, because if you charge a higher price at the peak times, you'll discourage that kind of travel the most, and you'll maximize your time savings. You provide choice to people, which is important, especially in our political system. And you can ease subway crowding if you do time of day pricing on the subways. The BTA also provides or allows for instant modeling. You don't have to wait, as is the case with the official models, days, weeks, or months to screen different policies that you might be proposing. So you could examine toll changes, fare hikes, service changes. If service is going to be curtailed on subways, there's a way to model how that's going to affect subway usage, and then subway revenues, and then induced traffic. And public space reallocation. We actually have a switch in the model that allows us to take any amount of street space out of service, away from vehicles, and then you see how traffic speeds change in response to that. And the notion is that by making this all transparent, you demystify the whole idea of traffic planning. You take the idea of a remote priesthood, and instead you democratize that, and just possibly you can win public trust so that they see traffic as something that they can affect in terms of policy and their role as citizens, and not just something that is imposed upon them by remote bureaucrats. So some of the strengths of the BTA, we've designed it so that you can divide the 24 hours of the day into as many as 7 different time periods. As I said, we've got weekends separate from weekdays, time variable subway pricing, and these important interactivities. And finally, the idea is that anyone pretty much can use it. Now, there are some limitations. The model is set up only to model a toll on driving into the Manhattan Central Business District. So we can't model all other feasible ways of pricing. For example, and I meant to say this in my remarks about Sam. Sam has a terrifically provocative idea about starting over the whole tolling system on the bridges and tunnels in New York City to toll all the approaches into Manhattan where there's the most traffic congestion and the most transit alternatives, and to phase out, reduce, and in some cases eliminate tolls at the periphery. We could get the BTA to model that, but we'd have to tweak it. And Sam's no stranger to the Daily News. He has op-eds there all the time. I made some copies of the op-ed that he had a couple of weeks ago in which he put out this idea. So we would have to tweak the BTA in order to study that. We also can't geographically differentiate. The way it's set up, we can't separate the impact, the traffic impacts on different portals into the CBD. We don't yet have a way of treating carpooling explicitly. We have to make some arbitrary assumptions about car occupancy rates, because if you raise the tolls on driving, you're probably going to get some increase in car occupancy. And we don't know just how much that's going to be. Maybe at some point we can incorporate that. This last thing I'll sort of skip, and we can cover that in just questions if we later on. Other strengths of the BTA is that we can at least estimate who's going to pay the tolls by county. And we have a slide on that we're going to show later. We have a terrific cost-benefit section that we're going to show in some slides later on that's based importantly on the value of time. And we've gone to great measures to try to quantify the average value of drivers' time, differentiated by whether they're driving on weekdays or on weekends, and whether they're driving within the heart of the city or in the fringes of the city. Bus boarding, if you eliminate bus fares, as we propose in one of our some of our policy proposals, you speed buses because you eliminate the human gridlock at the front of the bus. We have that quantified. Delay costs we're going to get into, and the results are robust with respect to elasticities, which means if you change our price elasticity assumptions and our time elasticity assumptions, you don't get huge changes in the results. Some more details. Maybe I should just go through this kind of quickly so we can get into some of the findings. But we had to separate vehicle trips into the central business district according to 6 different trip types. And then we've got 7 periods of the day, as I mentioned. So we've actually got 42 subgroups, and that's one of the reasons that the spreadsheet is so large. And in fact, here's just a little snapshot. You're not supposed to be able to read this. This is just one little piece of one of the pieces of the spreadsheet. In fact, I did a little calculation that this window that you're looking at, which is maybe 30 rows and 13 or 15 columns, as compared to the entire spreadsheet, this is the size of this is Times Square as compared to all of Manhattan. And well, you may think of Times Square as big, but it's actually small. It's just about 4 acres. So the whole spreadsheet that this is about is, more than 1,000 times as vast as this little snapshot. This is some baseline data from Plan YC, that the average vehicle speed in the central business district over those 12 hours of the day is just 8 miles an hour. Now, based on the different vehicle volumes in the central business district at different times of day, and these are our 7 time periods, we've calculated, and we used a curve that's embodied in this graph. We calculate that these are the speeds that obtained during the 7 different times of day, which when weighted, both by the amount of traffic and weighted by the time that drivers spend on the road. There's that funny paradox about vehicle time. If you bicycle up a hill at 10 miles an hour and then you bicycle down the hill at 20 miles an hour, your average speed is not 15. It's the harmonic mean of 10 and 20, which is 13 1/3. So slow speeds have a disproportionate impact on average speeds. And this relationship is very key to the work that we've done. And this basically indicates that as the amount of vehicles per hour within this central business district increases, the speeds go down. And this shows the relationship. Then we have outside of the CBD, because all these trips that are going into the heart of the city start outside. And in fact, typically more miles are driven outside than inside. And Plan YC also stipulated that this is the average vehicle speed sort of in the region minus the Manhattan Central Business District. And these are the average speeds that you've got in those 7 periods in order to satisfy that average. And this is the curve that applies to freeways in California and more or less applies to highways, to non-street conditions, non-gridlock conditions. Am I allowed to say gridlock without having to kick back And so now the way that the model works, or the heart of the model, is this idea. Every trip that's driven into the CBD has an out-of-pocket cost. Some of those trips are now paying tolls. Some aren't, but some are. Many of those trips are paying to park. Not all, but many of them are. There's gasoline costs. There's even an expected value of, in fact, is that in the next slide? No, maybe I skipped that. Of the chances of being in a crash and having to, pay higher insurance costs. Now, when you add a toll to that, you increase the price. And based on the price elasticity of driving, you get a reduction in the number of trips. So that's this first thing. This change in the trip cost creates a change in the number of trips. Now, we also have a time-switching propensity between periods. If you charge different prices for different times of the day, you're going to get some shifting. And then you also have switching between driving and transit. And you combine all these to calculate new volumes of trips. And what happens, though, it's that when you when you charge a toll and you have less traffic, then opportunistic drivers are going to rush in to fill that vacuum. And maybe not all of it, but some of it. And how much they fill depends upon the relationship between the price elasticities and the time elasticities. So when you start with 870,000 trips a day into the CBD, if you charge one of the tolls that we've modeled, which is either $3, $6, or $9 to drive into the heart of the city, depending upon the time of day, you will lose about 180,000 of those trips. But then the roads are so clear that they fill up again, not entirely, but to some extent. Now the roads are more crowded and trips take longer. And so the time elasticity kicks in reverse. Some of those trips disappear and you get this. I guess it's the Yogi Berra-ism, you know, it's so crowded no one goes there. And we've literally had in our model to take these oscillations through about 10 iterations to get to the point where the pendulum stops swinging. And that point is one of the outputs of the model, the reduction in traffic. I think I've sort of explained this a little bit, but this part of the model was so complex that we made our own little flow sheet so that we could follow pretty much how it works. And with the subways, there's a similar process depending upon those prices. And in the interest of time, I'm going to pass over that, but we do have some results. Now, on time switching, we have two data sources. One is the fact that in early 2001, before 9/11, the Port Authority implemented differential tolling on the Holland and Lincoln tunnels and the George Washington Bridge. And you know, they threw out the post 9/11 data, but finally by 2003 they had data that they could really function with. And they extracted from that empirical data elasticities that pertain to time switching between periods as a function of the toll differential. In other words, how ready are drivers to switch the time at which they travel based on how much money they might be able to save. And a similar set of data was derived by the Puget Sound Regional Council in Seattle through a wonderful simulation study that they did several years ago, where they made terrific use of their of FHWA money, unlike some cities that we will not name. So we adapted that data, and that's part of the quantitative basis for our model. Now, here's what we found. This is with $3, $6, and $9, and I'm not yet showing just how that applies, so you're going to be a little bit in the dark here. But these red, if you will, little bars are increases in trips because those times would be tolled less. And these yellow bars below the line are decreases in travel because those trips would be tolled more. And the sum total of the reds equals the sum total of the yellows. This is exclusive of trips being tolled off the road, period. This is simply the time switching thing sort of adjusted. Now, what I take away from this is that the model is not predicting huge changes in trip scheduling by drivers. In fact, I almost think that maybe it underpredicts. Maybe I was a little too conservative in how I adapted the Port Authority and the Puget Sound results. But in a sense, it's good because we're not resting our findings on a notion that people might find simply unrealistic, that everybody is going to shift their travel time in order to pay only $6 instead of $9 or pay $3 instead of $6. But the terrific thing about even this little amount of time shifting is that it produces disproportionately positive gains in drivers' time because you're backing away from that hyper-congested peak period. And now we have a similar thing on the subways. And what's happening here, now most of this is increases because here we modeled, and this was with the old subway fare, the $2 fare was actually a $1.52 fare. That's the average fare that we were all paying up until 2 weeks ago. And here we modeled if you had fares that were either $2 in the morning peak and the evening peak, $1.50 in some of the adjacent periods, $1 or 50 cents in some of the others, and then 0 in the middle of the night. And what happens as a result of those prices, the model predicts, is that you have these reductions in the 2 peak hours, and then you have increases everywhere else. So this is not just time shifting, it's also the induced demand, because the average subway fare under this plan would have been like 79 cents instead of $1.52. But the takeaway from this is that by charging a differential price on the subway, you have the possibility of reducing peak usage and solving to some extent that terrible, inhumane, and vastly resented cattle crowding phenomenon. And also you improve the efficiency of travel because people can get on and off those trains faster. Now we get into delay costs. And one of the lovely things about calculating delay costs is that this is not a tolling issue. There are things that this model can tell us that are completely independent of whether we're proposing to charge a toll or whether we're proposing to change the toll structure at all. And the most important thing is that we can calculate the delay that one additional trip by car or truck into the central business district, the delays that that trip is imposing upon everybody else that's in the traffic stream. Now, if we were fluid dynamics physicists, maybe we would have the knowledge to be able to construct a model that would say, all right, if I'm driving in from Sheepshead Bay, I'm going to be perturbing the following 3,712 vehicles by 3 seconds that guy, and I got her, she's 6 seconds slower because I cut in front of her and I'm costing him a half a second, and adding up all those, but we can't do that. Instead, the model simulates that by hypothesizing, what if 100 more cars were driven into the central business district every day? Well, we can recalculate the speeds inside and outside the CBD, and we assume, even though we know when people drive in and we know when people drive out, we don't have links between those two. And maybe I'll get to that right here. If we have one additional vehicle driving in, let's say in the AM peak, which is 6 to 9 in the morning. Now, we don't know when that vehicle is leaving. And so we assume that all vehicles, regardless of when they drive in, are leaving in proportion to all 870,000 vehicles when they leave, because we know what those numbers are. So the delay costs on the outbound legs, which are shown here, are the same for all those trips. It's the inbound legs that are different, and there's actually a tiny little gray thing here in the graveyard. It's microscopic, because if I drive in from Sheepshead Bay at 2 in the morning, I don't really add to anybody else's congestion cost, because first of all, there are so few vehicles on the road that there aren't that many people for me to bug. And second, I'm not slowing them down because I'm not really taking away necessary capacity. The system is operating well within capacity. But as traffic increases, these change. And then we have an analogous thing on weekends where these bars are actually somewhat lower. And this, if you can read the numbers, this is how the numbers are derived. And what this is saying, let's go back to that AM peak trip, which is right here. The AM, by driving in from 6 to 9, I'm causing 2.4 hours of delay to everybody else that's on the roads during that same time. I'm not causing that to one person, that's the sum total of all those seconds. Now, since my outbound trips are sort of randomly distributed according to the curve of all of the outbound trips, my outbound leg is causing almost no delay to people in the graveyard shift. It's causing a little bit to people in the 5 to 6 a.m. I've got outbound trips 6 to 9, some of them here, as well as all the inbound trips 6 to 9. I'm actually causing a fair amount of delay to this in this 4-hour period, because that's the PM peak, which I think is 2 to 6 p.m. And you add all that up and you get 3 3/4 hours. So in other words, the average trip that's made at between 6 to 9 in the morning, and we don't know when that trip is leaving, is causing a sum total of 3 3/4 hours of delays. Now we put price tags on these. And we've got values of time. And these numbers here of the value of time, these are distillations of what we estimate to be the value of driver's time from 18-wheelers, which is a tiny part of the traffic mix, to people traveling in their single-occupant vehicle, which is the largest single mode, although it's not a majority, it's a plurality. And according to our numbers, and they're out there for anybody to see within the spreadsheet, a vehicle hour driven within the central business district on a weekday has an average value to the average driver and the people in his or her car or truck of about $50. Within the CBD on weekends, it's only about $29, and then outside the CBD, it's less. And the reason it's less outside the CBD is literally that there are fewer wealthy people, fewer people in high-powered jobs, and the value of time is basically a function of how wealthy people are and how much they earn at work, and therefore how much they feel the cost of time when they're stuck in traffic, because that's not productive, at least not the same as being on the job, fixing the valve in the boiler if you're a plumber, or being at that meeting if you're an attorney or an ad exec, etc. And so the delay cost, this is not as visible as I'd like it to be. These are dollars, and this is $80 here, and this line is $100, and this is $120. And this is I've now redone this for cars instead of all vehicles, because trucks actually have caused more delays because they're bigger vehicles. But if you drive in during the AM peak, and again, we don't know when you're leaving, so that's randomly distributed, your trip is creating delay costs of about $120 total to everybody else that happens to be on the roads within the metropolitan system at that time. However, these delay costs are very sensitive to the assumptions we're making as to how much traffic there is on the road. What we've sketched here, here's a 0% on the y-axis, and here's a 0%, here on the x-axis. If we hypothesize that traffic is down 5%, which is what this line shows, then we bounce off this curve, and the result of having 5% less traffic now in 2009 than was in 2007 is that all these delay costs are less than I was just showing by about 14 or 15%. So that's, there's always this double-edged sword with, being a transportation person. In a sense, if you want congestion pricing, you want there to be a lot of traffic now just before you put the tolls in, because you'll be solving a very big problem. If the recession is partially solving that, albeit temporarily, at least we think so, well, that's at least something that we should be aware of. And again, we want to be realistic, we want to be fair, we want to not be one-sided on the data. All right, these are assumptions we made with elasticities, and I'm actually going to pass that, because this is, I think at this point, our most interesting and meaningful slide. And now we are sliding into the policy proposals. If we have a $3, $6, or $9 toll, $9 during the morning and evening peaks, $6 during shoulder periods, and $3 in the graveyard periods, and then on weekends it would be $2, $3, and $4, but this is just for weekdays. Here are the tolls that we are proposing to charge. They're these tiny little red things at the bottom. And arrayed above them for comparison are the delay costs that a trip that is taken, notwithstanding the toll, is imposing upon all the other drivers on the road. So what this is indicating is that even a $3, $6, or $9 toll, which might break the political system, it did twice already, is almost nothing. It's an order of magnitude. That's a factor of 10, or even a little bit more than a factor of 10, less than the delay costs that person is imposing on everybody else by choosing to drive. So just imagine by comparison, you're a factory owner and you're polluting because it's cheaper to have your plant be that way. And let's say it is known that by polluting you are causing $1 million worth of illness effects, premature death, loss of visibility and other amenities from clean air. You're causing $1 million worth of damage. And what if the authorities propose to charge you only $100,000 worth of fine, or $80,000? Well, you'd be getting off pretty easy if that were the case, and you probably wouldn't be putting in very good pollution control equipment to make sure that you didn't pollute either. You'd probably pay it because it would just be a small fraction. Well, this toll proposal of $3, $6, or $9 that we called the Kheel-Komanoff Plan is that proportion to the time pollution, if you will, that a decision to drive on a given day is imposing upon society as a whole. So we would like to think that this slide and this model and this information provides a kind of ethical basis, a moral framework for proposing, once again, congestion tolling, but we might say congestion tolling done right or done differently than it was done the other times. Now, in designing a toll, you want to think about, well, your toll levels are going to vary. You need to think about whether your toll is going to increase or replace current tolls. How much are you going to charge trucks? Are you going to have a taxi surcharge? Are you going to reclaim streets from autos? What are you going to do with subway and bus fares? Are you going to offer free express buses and free commuter rail within the confines of the city? And are you going to turn on that switch so that you can say, well, traffic's down 4% or it's down 7%. What does that do to my toll revenues, et cetera? All of these are things that the model easily accommodates. Now, under this plan that we've been talking about, here are the impacts. We would lose almost $1.5 billion at the transit fare box. I should say that this plan provides for free buses, and it approximately drops the subway fare in half. Roughly, that's what it does, although doing that by time of day. It charges $3, $6, or $9 on weekdays, $2, $3, or $4 on weekends. So we lose this at the fare box. We save a tiny bit of money because we don't have to maintain the bus toll collection machinery. It costs us $200 million to offset the loss of fares on the commuter buses and the commuter rail within the city. The express buses. We pick up this much from the toll. We have to spend not a huge amount of money to administer the toll. And very importantly, we pick up a lot of money through a taxi surcharge, which in this particular plan is a 33% taxi surcharge, not just on the drop, but on the mileage and on the time. And what the taxi surcharge does is three things. It provides revenue that we badly need. It helps ensure that taxi use doesn't rush to fill up that nice space that we've created within the central business district. And we balance the tolls more equitably, as we'll see when we look at the BTA. Well, the net in this is $10 million. Now, of course, when you've got vast quantities like this, a $10 million net is zero. This is revenue neutral. That's just, $10 million is kind of a noise result. So this is a revenue neutral plan. Now, as a result of that plan, this is what would happen to vehicle speeds, depending upon the time of day. Well, there'd be only a tiny increase in the vehicle speed in the middle of the night, but who cares? The speeds are already high and there's not that many people traveling, so that's sort of, the fact that this is only 1% is sort of cool. We have bigger gains at other times of day, and there's an analogous thing that we don't show here on the weekends. What are the benefits of doing all this? And we have 6 categories of benefits. The fiscal benefit, that's that $10 million net from before, so it's nothing. This is designed to be revenue neutral. You can design plans that are not revenue neutral. I'm going to skip this one for a minute. The health benefit is actually the increased physical activity that more people, we believe, will bike and walk when there's less traffic, and that's all dynamic, that's all roughly quantifiable. The environmental benefits there are 4 of them. That's reduced air pollution, like reduced smog, reduced carbon emissions to help with climate, reduced noise, and fewer crashes. And what is impressive about this number, I submit, is that it is relatively small. Now, this is a two-edged sword for me too, because I spent many years crusading about air pollution from cars, and especially car crashes, and it is a terrible, awful thing. But what this suggests to me is that congestion pricing, traffic pricing, should not be sold on the basis of an improved environment in the traditional ways of looking at the environment, because the benefits are not that great. If air pollution from cars today was the way that it was in 1969 and 1970, when Brian Ketchum founded the nation's first automotive pollution engineering lab on Frost Street in Brooklyn that drove the science in the United States and elsewhere about automotive air pollution for over a decade, this bar would be up to here. But air pollution from cars is a relatively minor issue at this point because of the improved technology. Now, insurance costs would go down, so that's a benefit. What is this mobility decrease? Now, this is sort of a tricky thing. This relates to the fact that car trips that will not be taken any longer because of the tolls, those trips had value to the people who took them. They might have been causing congestion for everybody else, and we count that in our calculations. But trips that are tolled off the roads, we shouldn't take them lightly. That's a lost amenity to people, and we have a very lovely, elegant way of estimating that, which you're welcome to ask in the discussion part. But what I want to focus on is the time savings. This is the real benefit, and that's what I think public policy, advocacy should focus on, because there needs to be a congruence between what are the objective benefits of something like this and the way in which it's advocated for. All right, the last slide, which will conclude the slides, but then I'm going to want to take you quickly through a few parts of the BTA, and then we can have some discussion, is this lovely quote from the German writer Wolfgang Sachs, which is worth reading. Once a certain traffic density is surpassed, every driver contributes involuntarily to a slowing of traffic. It's nice. It's not their fault. It's involuntary. They don't want to, but this is the way that the world is set up. The time that the individual driver steals from all the others by slowing them down is greater many times over than the time he or she might have hoped to gain by taking the car. This is a classic, prisoner's dilemma, externality trap. And the only way to get out of this trap is to charge a toll that internalizes some. And the tolls we're talking about are really, 1/10 of the time costs that the driver would be imposing upon others by taking that trip. It's really a baby step substantively, but obviously it will be a giant step politically.